You're standing in a field in Cardiff, New York. It's October 1869. Workers are digging a well when their shovels hit something hard. They brush away the dirt. And there, staring up at them from the earth, is a 10-foot-tall man, stone, naked, and very, very dead. Within days, thousands of people came to see it. Within weeks, the entire country was talking about it. Newspapers declared it proof that giants once walked the earth. Preachers cited the Bible. Scientists arrived with measuring tape. One geologist declared it unmistakably genuine. It was a complete fake. George Hull, a tobacconist from Binghamton, New York, had carved the entire thing from a block of gypsum. He'd hired a stonecutter in Chicago. It cost him $2,600. He did it because he'd gotten into an argument with a traveling preacher about the Nephilim, the giants mentioned in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 4, and he wanted to prove how easy it was to fool people. But here's the thing that makes this story uncomfortable. The reason the hoax worked so well is that the belief was already ancient. People didn't need a stone giant in a field to think giants were real. They'd been finding evidence for centuries, and the evidence to them was overwhelming. Go back to the year 1677. Robert Plot, the first keeper of the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford, published a book called The Natural History of Oxfordshire. In it, he included an illustration of a massive bone fragment, too large for any known animal, too shaped to be a rock. He concluded it must have belonged to a giant human, a man so enormous that history had simply forgotten him. He was wrong. It was the femur of a mammoth. But nobody in 17th century England had any framework for understanding extinct megafauna. The word extinction wouldn't even exist as a scientific concept for another century. So if the bone was from an animal too big to be any animal they knew, then logic said it had to be human. This wasn't stupidity. This was the best available reasoning, given what they had. Go back even further. In the 2nd century AD, the Greek travel writer Pausanias described visiting a site in the city of Megalopolis, in the Peloponnese, where enormous bones were displayed. Locals told him they belonged to giants, specifically to the Gigantopithecus, the mythological war between the Olympian gods and the giants. Pausanias, who was generally a skeptical man, measured the bones and admitted they were far too large for any human. But he didn't conclude they were from a different species. He concluded the ancient giants were simply a different kind of human, one that had died out. And in the 7th century, Isidore of Seville, one of the most influential scholars of the entire medieval world, wrote his Etymology, an encyclopedia that shaped European education for hundreds of years. In it, he classified giants as real, not legendary, real. He wrote that they were the offspring of fallen angels and human women, just as Genesis described. He placed them in the same intellectual category as known races of people because the bones kept being found. The bones kept being found, that's the key. Every time a farmer unearthed a mammoth femur in Europe, or a dinosaur vertebra was discovered in China, or a mastodon jaw surfaced in North America, someone had to explain what it was. And for most of human history, the only available category was something human but bigger. Because the alternative, that entire species could vanish from the earth, was unthinkable. Literally. The concept didn't exist yet. So giants filled the gap. In Norse mythology, the Jotun, the frost giants, existed before the gods. They were the raw, untamed forces of nature made flesh. When the Prose Edda was compiled by Snorri Sturluson in 13th century Iceland, it described a cosmos built from the body of a murdered giant named Ymir. His flesh became the earth. His blood became the sea. His bones became the mountains. The entire world was a giant's corpse. In Hindu mythology, Rakshasas were enormous demon beings who haunted forests and battlefields. In Irish legend, the Fomorians were a race of monstrous giants who ruled Ireland before the arrival of the gods. In Greek mythology, the Titans were so vast that when Kronos was imprisoned, the poets said he was buried beneath a mountain. Every culture on Earth found oversized bones, and every culture reached the same conclusion. Then in 1935, something strange happened. A Dutch paleoanthropologist named Ralph von Koenigswald was browsing an apothecary shop in Hong Kong, the kind of shop that sold ingredients for traditional Chinese medicine, when he saw a molar tooth in a jar. It was enormous, far too large for any human, any gorilla, any chimpanzee. He bought it immediately. Over the following decades, more teeth and jawbone fragments surfaced from similar shops and from cave deposits across southern China and Vietnam. The creature was eventually named Gigantopithecus blacki. It stood nearly 10 feet tall. It weighed over 1,000 pounds. It lived in the dense forests of Southeast Asia until roughly 300,000 years ago. A giant, a real one, not human, but close enough that for a moment the old myths felt less impossible. Gigantopithecus went extinct long before modern humans appeared. There is no credible evidence that Homo sapiens ever lived alongside it. But the tooth that von Koenigswald found that day in Hong Kong was the same kind of tooth that had been sitting in apothecary shops across China for centuries, sold as dragon bones or giant's teeth. Traditional Chinese medicine had been grinding them into powder and prescribing them for ailments for thousands of years. How many giant teeth were ground into powder before someone realized what they actually were? Here's where it gets personal. The reason giant myths persist, the reason you've probably felt a flicker of what if at some point in your life has nothing to do with bones. It has to do with scale. You live in a world built for your size. Doors are your height. Chairs fit your body. The ceiling is just above your head. Everything around you confirms that you are the right size for this world. But sometimes you stand at the base of an ancient ruin and look up. Sometimes you walk through a redwood forest and tilt your head back until your neck hurts. Sometimes you see a whale breach the surface of the ocean. And for just a moment, something inside you remembers that the world was not built for you. You are small. You have always been small. And deep in your ancestral memory, something whispers that there used to be something bigger. That whisper is the origin of every giant myth ever told. Not a lie, not a hoax, not ignorance. A feeling so ancient and so universal that every civilization on every continent independently told the same story. Because every human who has ever lived has stood beneath something vast and felt the same primal, wordless fear. Giants were never just about bones. They were about the human need to explain why the world sometimes feels too large, why certain stones are shaped like weapons but could never be lifted by human hands, why mountains look like sleeping bodies, why the ground occasionally produces something so enormous that your mind refuses to accept it came from a regular animal. Robert Plot wasn't a fool. Pausanias wasn't gullible. Isidore of Seville wasn't lying. They were doing what every human brain does, pattern matching against the available categories. And for most of human history, the available categories didn't include extinction. They included humans, and they included gods. And anything too big for a human had to be something closer to a god. Today, we have paleontology. We have radiocarbon dating. We have genetic analysis. We know that mammoths and mastodons and Gigantopithecus all existed and all disappeared. We know that the enormous bones in ancient temple displays belonged to long-vanished animals, not to the Titan ancestors of the gods. But the feeling persists. When you walk past a construction site and see an excavator tearing into the earth, and for a split second the machine looks alive, massive, metallic, unstoppable, something ancient in your brain registers it as a giant. When you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon and feel your stomach drop, that vertigo is the same vertigo your ancestors felt when they looked up at a mountain and imagined something sleeping inside it. When you hear thunder roll across the sky and your body tenses before your mind catches up, that tension is older than language. That is the body remembering what the brain has forgotten. You don't believe in giants anymore. Not really. But part of you, the part that still flinches at thunder, that still stares at the stars, that still feels very small, that part never fully stopped. The Cardiff giant was a hoax. Gigantopithecus was real. The mammoth bones were real. And the feeling that made people look at all of them and whisper, giant? That was the most real thing of all. Because you were never supposed to feel big. You were supposed to look up.